A throwback to the mid-90s, Without Escape is a first-person point-and-click horror adventure game made almost entirely by a lone developer. It casts you as someone returning home from school and finding the house deserted, going to bed before being woken by a strange noise in the night. Not the most original premise, but still an intriguing one, and the game manages to build up the tension of the scenario as you explore the deserted house in the dark, aided by some atmospheric music and sparse but well-chosen sound effects. Most of the rooms in the house turn out to be inexplicably locked, and much of the game is spent hunting around solving puzzles to find keys in order to progress. The atmosphere carries over into the game's graphics, which might not come out looking like a AAA game, but they're perfectly accomplished, and it can be played with or without a film grain filter. It's all quite accomplished for a solo independent developer. Unfortunately, it also illustrates why lone developers aren't a common thing in gaming anymore. There are occasional exceptions, but few people are going to excel in all of the many aspects involved in making a game, and here it's sadly in the vital gameplay and story components that it starts to fall apart. For the most part, the puzzles aren't completely dreadful, but they are lacking in logic much of the time, and come across as someone trying to come up with obstacles to put into the game after coming up with the concept, rather than finding puzzles that fit naturally into place. At one point you find the remote control for the television, but discover it doesn't have batteries, so a good chunk of the early part of the game is spent hunting around for those. But for some reason the game doesn't give any explanation as to why I can't use my own revolutionary solution of simply pressing the buttons that I can see right there on the TV set itself, like anyone in that situation actually would. Some of the more cartoonish adventure games might have got away with strange puzzles, and random logic puzzles have been pretty much a standard amongst first-person adventure games since the days of The Seventh Guest and Myst. But Without Escape is neither cartoonish nor logical. It does have one or two more interesting puzzles, but otherwise there's nothing that really stands out, and it cancels out any goodwill from the better puzzles with its weaker moments. There's a part involving pixel hunting where you have to click on a precise spot on a bookshelf to uncover a clue, and clicking anywhere else just gives you a generic description, leaving you with no reason to assume you've missed anything. There's also a puzzle involving knowledge of the chemical elements. I don't mind having to look up an element to complete a puzzle, but I spent a good chunk of time wandering the level looking for a periodic table on the walls, or a chemistry book on the bookshelves, before discovering the only way to do it was to actually exit the game and turn to Google, which is very sloppy design. The story also gets weaker and weaker as it goes along. Any atmosphere and tension built up in the early parts of the game start to fall away when it decides to turn to the route of graphic gore instead, though thankfully it never stoops so low as to start throwing in jump scares. But it's at the very end where it goes completely off the rails. Consider this a spoiler warning for the end of the game in the next part of this video. At the conclusion of the game, you discover the universe is ending because the beings that created it have now destroyed it because it's come to the end of its allotted time, and it's time to create a new one. As if that wasn't enough, apparently everyone in the universe has been tested, and you've turned out to be the only one who was capable of finding a couple of batteries and adjusting the thermostat for the water. It's all ridiculous nonsense and doesn't feel in keeping with the tone of the game up to that point at all. I've been critical of it, but it's not a terrible way to pass the brief hour or so that it takes to complete the game. It's just not an especially great one either. It does evoke the 90s first-person adventure games it's clearly inspired by, but doesn't quite do enough to distinguish itself to make it worth a recommendation to anyone who isn't already a fan of the genre.